All right, making another attempt to record Chapter 8. I think I have my audio issues worked out, and here we go. All right, the chapter starts out with a quote, and I really liked this quote. It says, "There are risks and costs to a program of action, but they are far less than the long-range risks and costs of comfortable inaction." So as a leader, you have to make difficult decisions, and sometimes these decisions can cause short-term difficulties, but not making decisions can cause long-range problems that are far greater than any of the short-term problems that you have to deal with. So in order to help make these decisions, there have been several leadership models that have come about, and we're going to talk about several of those today. Okay, there are 6 models: the PAARP, Dynamic Culture Leadership Model, Bowman and Deal's Reframing Leadership and Management in Organizations Model, the Lens Leadership, Art and Science and Public Leadership Model, Uckel's Multiple Linkage Model, and Hargrove and Glidwell's Impossible Leadership Model. So we're going to talk about all 6 of these today. Okay, this is the PAARP model, and this is just an overview of it. This is on page 181 in your book. But the P stands for purpose, the A, assemble and charter, the second A is align, then resource and perform. So we will talk about each one of these areas. All right, so this model, when followed through, can result in improved morale of team members, better outcomes, and a greater value for the organization. And this model reminds me some of the dynamics, the different stages of group dynamics that we already talked about. Because they feel that throughout a team life cycle, there are different purposes throughout, and that professional teams, their interactions occur in 5 distinct phases. So realize that PAARP is a cycle, and for good leadership and performance, this cycle should continue throughout the repurposing of the mission and the organizations of the team. So first we will, first thing you do is to determine a purpose. So to determine a purpose, this helps to add clarity to what the group is doing. It provides a challenge. You also help gain commitment from those who are part of the group. This is a good time to get feedback. So in this early stage, when you are determining what the group is going to do, is to get feedback from team members and also determine the complexity of the task. All right, the next to the PAARP is to assemble and charter. This is when you get the group together, and the purpose of getting this is to allow each group member to understand their roles and responsibilities. The leader must, when they're assembling individuals for a team, they have to take into account the knowledge, skills, and abilities of each team member. So we talked about this again in forming groups before. Knowing the members' knowledge, skills, and abilities is essential for group members to be able to work together. It doesn't do you any good to have individuals who are smart but cannot work together as a team. And it is essential that the group members have the interpersonal skills to be able to work together. All right, next is align. All right, during the align phase, this is similar to the forming, storming, and norming phases defined by Tuckman when we talked about group dynamics. This is when the group members assemble and they align as a group to find their place as a team. This is the perfect time for team members to begin to disagree with each other. Remember, we talked about how conflict, if done in a professional manner, is actually beneficial. If you always go along with what one person says and you have what we call group think, your ideas will never be heard, and there's no need to have a group because everybody believes the same thing that one individual says. And so just a real quick review, this is the same slide from Chapter 7 about the informing stage is where you're notified of membership. The forming is your discovery phase. You find out who dominates the conversation, who works well together, who doesn't work well together. The storming phase is when group members no longer feel obligated to be cordial and be nice to each other. The norming is when the group members relinquish their personal agenda and start to work more as a team. Performing is when new ideas are developed, and people start to realize that no individual is as good as the group together. And then adjourning occurs when the task is complete. So I thought I'd review those since I just talked about them several slides. All right, so the last section after adjourning, I'm sorry, not the last section. The next section is resource. All right, in resourcing, the team sets goals and expectations for each member and for the team, and provides them the needed resources to be able to do it. So this is where it is beneficial to set goals, not just for the entire group, but for each individual team member. But also as a leader, you need to be able to provide the resources needed for each person to do their job. And we're going to review goals since we're talking about them. So goals are regulators of your action. And so it helps to determine a direction and effort, and allows persistence to accomplish those goals. Research shows that specific, well-defined goals lead to greater improvements and greater performance as compared to vague and easy goals. So when you set the bar high for each team member and for the team together, you have a better outcome. All right, so part of a resource, it can be summed up in 7 steps. So this one step has different things within it. So you have to specify the objectives or tasks to be completed by the team, determine how that performance will be measured, specify the standards to which tasks or objectives need to be completed, specify the time period which it needs to be done, place a priority on goals when one goal needs to be accomplished more than the other, rate the goals as their difficulty and their importance, and determine the requirements for coordinating with team members. If you look at these goals, this is very similar to what we do in a clinical setting when we are discussing patient goals. And so we may determine by our plan of care how things will be performed. We may, and also in our plan of care, say initially we need, and I'm just going to use a shoulder for example, obtain passive range of motion, then work on active range of motion before beginning strengthening. It wouldn't do us any benefit to begin strengthening a patient that cannot move their arm. And so when you're talking about goals of a team, it's a good idea to specify what needs to be done, just like you would with patient care. All right, now we're going to talk about the next part of the PAARP, and that is perform. All right, so there are 5 types of followers, and if you think to groups you've been in or activities you've been a part of where people have to work together, I'm sure you've met several of these people within your group. So one is sheep. They're team members that are passive. They require the leader to motivate them externally, so they will follow you if you lead them. There's yes people. These are committed to the goal of the team, but they don't question the actions of the leader. Pragmatists, they tend to support the majority decision, but they also tend to remain in the background of the group. There's the alienated, and they can be found questioning the actions of the leader or attempting to stall or bring down the efforts of the group. And there's the star followers. They're independent, positive, and active. So not only think about what you've seen in groups, but what kind of group member are you? And so are you a yes person? Are you a sheep? Or do you alienate individuals? Or are you that star performer? All right, now we're going to move on to the next leadership model, the dynamic culture leadership model. So one thing I want you to remember about the dynamic culture leadership model is your goal is to change the culture of the organization. And so it is recognized as 3 levels that are critical for the development of this. So at the personal level, the team level, and the organizational level. So within the dynamic culture leadership model, there needs to be balance between maintaining order and achieving the optimized leadership. And realize optimized leadership is your goal. It may not occur at all times, but it's a very worthy goal, and it's in its ideal state. The goal of this is that you're going to be the right leader at the right time. So you will use the right form of leadership to lead in any given situation. Again, this is ideal. It may not be achievable. This is an example of this situational or transformational leadership that we talked about earlier in this semester. So based on your predetermined organizational culture, the mission of the organization, the vision, the strategies, and the consistency of leadership and management, situational and environmental assessment needs to be done to assure that you are maintaining that culture, that mission and vision. Transformational leadership provides the best approach to lead people and manage resources in a dynamic world. So in other words, you need to assess what's going on and then determine your leadership style. So within the dynamic culture leadership, they talk about the difference between leadership and management. So leadership deals with a longer time horizon. You're dealing with the future, where management deals with a shorter time horizon. You're dealing with activities and things that are going on day to day. The leadership deals with the vision first and then the mission. The management is mission oriented. With leadership, you want organizational validity. So are we doing the right things? Where management says, are we doing things right? So leadership wants to make sure the organization has the correct components, so the right people, the right resources, the right expertise to meet the future needs as well as current needs. Where a manager looks at what they have right now and makes sure that they can work the best with what they have. Within leadership, you develop and refine organizational culture, and management maintains organizational culture. Leadership is concerned with the timing and tempo of initiatives, and management is concerned with scheduling those initiatives and those projects. And one of the early questions we talked about is leadership as science or an art. And within the dynamic culture leadership model, they feel it's both. So science will deal with the technical skills, decisions that are made on analysis, developing systems that are important to organizations. They feel that the expert can be the systems and then cost control. But there's also an art to it where relationships are important. Decisions need to be made more on the perceptions of people than on data analysis. They work at developing relationships and networks that are important to organizations, not just the systems, and realize that people can be the experts. They also worry about image and customer relationships. So the dynamic culture leadership model entails a process that emphasizes the leadership team that includes assessment, communication, strategic planning, decision making, employee enhancement, and learning organization improvement. There is a sequence of events that improve leadership, and we will talk about those in this next slide. And this is the leadership process of the dynamic culture leadership model. So initially you get the team together. Then you move to step 2, which is communication improvement. Work on communication, modeling, and training. Number 3 is strategic planning. You develop a strategic plan, and this is the structured, inclusive process of planning that you need to determine a mission, vision, strategies, goals, objectives, and an action plan. Then is the decision-making alignment. Align the decision-making of the team. Work on the operational plan while understanding reality-based decision-making. Employee enhancement. Assess the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and give responsibilities to the proper individuals who have expertise in specific areas. Next is knowledge management. Use what the organization knows and what it has learned in the past to improve its effectiveness and its efficiency. Evaluation. So assess where the organization is within this dynamic culture and make changes as needed. Reflection. So when things are done, you reflect to see how well the organization did. And then retraining and retooling. Begin the process again as needed to retrain individuals in this new method. So when you're going through those 9 steps of the leadership process, you must keep in mind the organization's mission, vision, strategies, goals, and values. If you don't, you're not following where you need to be leading. And for this model, you need to organize a leadership team that is diverse. So aligning people who have different styles, skills, and experience is needed. In this model, cultural and individual diversity is valued. And so ensuring that you don't have leaders who all behave, think, and act exactly the same is imperative. And so they talk about individuals who have high leadership and high management skills, and those who look at the science of leadership versus the art of leadership. Those who have high technical skills, high leadership, and use relationships are a balanced leader. Those who are relationship managers and technical or analytical managers are a balanced manager. Those who have higher analytical skills will be more towards the science, and those who have a higher relationship skills will be more towards the art. Someone who's an equalized, balanced leader and manager will have high abilities in both leadership and management, and understand the art and science of leadership. All right, within this dynamic culture leadership model, how do leaders shape their culture? So there's five primary mechanisms. One is attention. Leaders communicate their priorities, their values, and their concerns to the team members. The things they talk about, the things they measure, the things they comment on, they praise or criticize are those that the team members are going to feel important because it's what's given the attention. Next is your reaction to crisis. This reaction increases learning about the values and the assumptions of the organization. Role modeling. Leaders set examples for others. 4 is allocation of resources. Where you divert your resources are those areas that the team members are going to feel are critical. And then the criteria for selection and dismissal. Leaders influence culture by recruiting people who have particular values, skills, and traits, and by either promoting them and giving them more responsibility or getting rid of them, if needed. And then there are some secondary mechanisms to organization culture. So the design of the organizational structure. Is it centralized, where all decisions come through one person? Or is it decentralized, where individuals can take the initiative and make decisions? The design of the systems and procedures. Where the emphasis is placed shows the concern and ambiguity reduction issues. And so when there are specific goals set, that shows team members that those are content areas or areas that are important. When not, your group team members may not feel it's important. The design of the facility. If you think of PT clinics, if I have a clinic that has a lot of wide open spaces and no private rooms, that's a clinic that I'm thinking may not be appropriate for a women's health setting. Similarly, if I don't have equipment to help with those who need gait training with assistance, it may not be the best clinic for a lower level patient or individuals who have had a stroke. And so how your facility is designed and it will say a lot about the goals of the organization. All right, stories, myths, and legends. The stories of great leaders or employees reinforce the value of the clinic. And then formal statements. This is the mission and vision of your organization. All right, we're moving on to the next leadership model, which is Bowman and Deal's Reframing Leadership and Management in Organizations model. In the Bowman and Deal's model, they suggest that leaders must be situational or contingency oriented. In other words, depending on the situation, that is how you will behave. This critical variables assist the leader in choosing the emphasis and style they need to be successful, but the same style of leadership will not be successful in all tasks. All right, there's 4 constructs considered to be important: structural, human resources, political, and symbolic. And we're going to talk about each of these 4. The structural construct is considered a frame, and it talks about how the organization's structure or work processes establish formal relationships and how groups facilitate coupling. Coupling is the level of adherence to organizational policies, rules, procedures, and social expectations. If the company has policies but loosely follows them, they're considered to have weak coupling. But if they have policies and you're expected to follow them to a T, that would be considered tight coupling. Right, within the social construct, there's assumptions of the structural frame. Organizations work best when they're governed by rational terms and norms that are expected. Organizations exist to accomplish established goals. So again, we talk about goals coming up. You guys are so used to writing goals for patient care, but as a leader, you're going to set goals for the organization and for the individuals within your team. The organizational design can be structured to fit each situation. Specialization permits more productivity and individual expertise. So this goes back to that slide I had that says, what if we train people and they leave? And the more concern is, what if you don't train people and they stay? Coordination and control are essential to effectiveness. And going back to specialization, if you think, if you want to work in a clinic that specializes in pediatrics, you would hope that you have individuals with expertise in that area, that you're not hiring somebody who's only done geriatrics or only done sports medicine. And so ensuring that the expertise fits the situation is important. And within that structural framework of Bowman and Deals, leaders do their homework. They develop new models on the relationship of the structure, strategy, and environment for the organization. They focus on the implementation of what they want to see happen, and they continually experiment, evaluate, and adapt. Leaders have to reinvent the organization often. They know what is needed, they develop new strategies, they implement them, and then they adapt again in the future as needed. All right, now we're going to talk about the second construct in Bowman and Deals, and that is human resources. Right, within the human resources construct, this is similar to the theory why. So organization exists to serve human needs. So humans don't exist to serve the organization. The organization needs people, and they need each other to be able to succeed. Right, when there's a fit between the individual and the organization and the person succeeds. But when there is a poor fit, the individual will be exploited, or they will seek to exploit the organization, or maybe both. Have you ever had a job that didn't fit you? It was a job, it paid you, but it wasn't the best fit. Employees want to be satisfied by their job, and you want to ensure that the job and the person are a good fit. Within that human resources leadership, leaders believe in the people and communicate that belief. The leaders are visible and accessible. If you've ever worked somewhere where the leader is not accessible to the individual, it's hard to follow them. And leaders empower. They increase participation, they provide support, they share information, and they move the decision making as far down the organization as possible and that is realistic. Right, now we're going to talk about the next construct which within the Bowman and Deals model, which is political. The political construct deals with resource allocations within the organization. It is where people create interesting relationships to gain these allocations of resources. So the political frame is based on power, conflict, and coalitions. Many people have a very negative view of a political construct, but it is definitely needed in organizations to be able to network and gain alliances within the healthcare. Within the political construct, your goals are set through negotiations among members of coalitions. So in any typical organization, there are many goals, and many of these goals are in conflict with one another. And so being able to network through other individuals can be important. In the political leadership, leaders clarify what they want and what they can get. They assess the distribution of power and interests. They build linkages to other stakeholders. They persuade first, negotiate second, and use coercion only as necessary. And within the Bowman and Deal model, the final construct is symbolic. So within the symbolic construct, it gets at the heart of what the organizational members feel about the issues and the events. What is important is not the event, but what that event means. And within symbolic leadership, the leaders interpret the experience. They transform leaders who are visionaries. They use those symbols to capture attention. They frame the experience or reduce the ambiguity and uncertainty through symbolism. They discover and communicate the vision, and they tell stories. So within the Bowman and Deal model, you need to choose a frame, and often these frames work together. So structural is when you need to set clear goals and have information that is communicated to others. A well-understood cause and effect relationship, technologies and systems that are in place, low ambiguity and low uncertainty. Within human resources, you need to have high employee leverage. You use this when there is low to moderate conflict or low to moderate diversity. The political is when there's declining resources and you need to find an increased diversity or make sure that there is an even distribution of power. And symbolic when there is used when there is unclear or ambiguous goals and information or poorly understood cause and effect relationships. All right, next we're going to talk about Lynn's leadership, art, and science and public leadership model. So in Lynn's leadership model, they feel that most situational leadership models are correct but are difficult to prove. And so this talks about both the art and the science for leadership development. In Lynn's leadership model, there are 4 factors. Personality. This is why we did our self-assessment. What is the best personality for leadership? Well, there's not one personality that is best, but understanding your personality and the personality of those around you is important. Skills and experience. Knowing that your skills and the skills of those around you is imperative. A design for change. Some leaders want to maintain the status quo. To me, that's a manager. True leaders want to change. And then favorability of the situation. So is the organization ready to change? Do they have the resources in place to be able to change? All right, the 5th model we're going to talk about is the Yuckel's multiple linkage model. So in the Yuckel's model, the key issue is how the leader interacts and their behavior and the situational variables on organizational performance. This model says that leaders in the short term need to evaluate and improve the variables for the situation, but in the long term they need to change the situation to better match the organizational strength and to achieve the mission. So the leader behavior on the intervening variables leads to better group performance. So in the multiple linkage model, there are variables. One is a formal reward system, and so this can be money, but that's not the only thing that could be given as a reward. You can give more responsibility, praise, whatever is important to that employee. Intrinsically motivating properties of the work itself. Think of the physical therapy world, and many of the rewards that we get are seeing our patients get better or providing quality care. So ensuring that there is intrinsic rewards or individuals who can be intrinsically motivated is important. At technology, there's technology to improve performance. Sometimes EMR systems improve performance, sometimes they don't. And so just ensuring that the technology is there is important. All right, geographical distribution. You're going to have clinics that have one clinic in one town, or you may work for an organization that has clinics around the United States. Policies and procedures. So we talked about this with coupling. You can have tight coupling where you expect policies and procedures to be followed, or you can have loose coupling where people don't necessarily follow the policies and procedures of the organization, and there's nothing to stop that. And then there's informal practices that have evolved over time. If you spend any time in a clinic, you realize they do things the way they've always been done in some cases. And this can include billing practices, patient care, even to getting a lunch. I worked in a clinic where no one took lunch. They would rather work 7 to 3 and get their 8 hours in and go home, or 8 to 4 or 9 to 5, whatever the hours were. Where other clinics, they had an hour for lunch. Many of them went out to lunch. It just depends, and that was the culture of the organization and how things were done. In the multiple linkage model, leaders are the ones that are in control, or at least effective leaders are, of the situation. They can either maintain the organization's status quo, or they can maintain that political environment, or you can change it and move it forward. All right, the final leadership model we're going to talk about is Hargrove and Glidwell's impossible leadership model. All right, in the impossible leadership model, the more able a leader is at developing contingency plans, the better. This model is often used for those who have these impossible jobs, such as elected officials, appointed officials, or those who deal with public goods and service. And again, in this model, coping rather than leading often takes center stage. We are in a patient care and a service environment, and so there will be times that you have upset patients or an upset provider or referring provider, and this impossible leadership model may take the lead. And so in this impossible leadership model, the leader learns to evaluate the conditions at that time and incorporate them into an overall vision for the organization. So as the leader, you have to be flexible and dynamic and direct the organization through political storms, manage it through emotional and structural equilibrium, and through choosing and using situational coping leadership strategies. And so a leadership method of accommodation may work better in this than a consensus strategy. All right, final slide. If you look on page 202, if you have your book, we have a picture of this that may be bigger if you can't see this on your screen. So this is a comparison of some of the leadership models. So the Uckel leadership model is short and long term, and the foundation is evidence. With Bowman and Deal, it is more short term than long term, and more practitioner than empirical based. The Hargrove and Glidwell is short term and is practitioner based, and Lynn is more long than short term, and it is more empirical than practitioner based. So realize not one of these leadership models is going to be right in every situation. So understanding that, and again we talked about the situational or contingency leadership, all of these have some aspect of that. And so you have to understand the situation before you can determine the appropriate leadership style. Thank you.